Now, we've all been there though. You get to the gym and you're 3, 4, maybe 5 working sets in and you're feeling flat. Where is it? Why isn't the pump coming? And you just feel like your workout's lost. You're not feeling the energy, you're not feeling the drive because the pump isn't there. Well, today we're going to go ahead and break down what we can do to prepare so that we have the best pump every time we go to the gym. Let's dive in. And we're going to break this down in a few different areas. So what do we have here? We have the complete pump protocol. Say goodbye to poor muscle pumps. Tadalafil supplements, lifestyle protocols. So we're going to break this down into meds, supplement, carbohydrates, electrolytes, and then we're going to talk about some things that can kill the pump, or stop it even from happening. So what is the pump and why does it feel so good? So first off, whenever you're exercising, you're going to get a release of dopamine and serotonin and adrenaline. So that's enough to already get you going. On top of that, we have the visual effect. We can see our muscles getting larger. So there's definitely a correlation that starts to happen there. And then actually on the cellular level, our cells can feel that they are expanding, right? That's the pump, the actual feeling of your cells swelling up and your skin getting tight. Your cells can actually tell that. And they actually have some receptors inside of them and increases its anabolism, right? It increases its anabolic, which just means to create or build more. Now, what is the pump? First off, we gave some things of why it felt good, but really overall, vasodilation is going to be one of the major things that's actually happening. Your smooth muscles, your endothelial lining, your blood vessels can double or triple in size. And so that's going to bring more nutrients, more oxygen. All these things are going to be feeding your cells, right? So that's going to increase your blood volume. That's going to allow your muscles to work harder. You also have byproducts that when your cells are working, like they'll produce some lactic acid, so that needs to get out. So there's a plethora of things going on here. And with the pump, we're going to get an increase in performance because we have more blood flow. Now, you can get some pretty tough skin tearing pumps where it's the point where you can't hardly move. It's funny because some people actually get that with Tadalafil and quarantine. They get like their lower back actually gets to the point where the pump is too big. They can hardly move and actually cause back pain. But hey, go big or go home. So all of this increase in blood flow, all this increase in nutrients is going to give our mitochondria more fuel to the fire in different ways. So that increases your exercise tolerance. And it's overall like it's pumping our heart. It's getting our cardiovascular system up and going. And as we'll talk, that's what nitric oxide does is it comes in and kind of cleans out all of our blood vessels. So we're going to have to talk about this in 3 parts. We're going to talk vascular. So we're going to talk nitric oxide and phosphodiesterase inhibitors and how they work on cyclic GMP. Talk osmotic, which is going to be like waterfall salt, hydration, carbs, electrolytes. And then we'll talk neuromuscular because you have to be able to contract the muscle. So the brain has to be able to tell it to contract in order for the muscles to work and then to increase the signaling molecules to bring more blood to the area. So let's start off with one of the more fun areas, the big guns, Tadalafil, right? And Tadalafil, most people think sexual dysfunction. Tadalafil is the generic name for Cialis, and people are like, oh, why are you taking a boner pill for going to the gym? Well, that's because increasing blood flow helps with sexual dysfunction. Well, and the reason we use Tadalafil because it helps with sexual dysfunction because it helps with opening up the blood vessels. So nitric oxide is going to be the signal. Our endothelial lining is going to release nitric oxide. That's what helps open up the blood vessels through cyclic GMP. And that's what's going to do what we chatted about earlier. It's going to open up our blood vessels, our pipe's going to increase in size, and then we get the pump. Now, the issue is we have this guy called phosphodiesterase, specifically number 5. That is what comes and breaks down cyclic GMP. And so what Tadalafil does is actually blocks phosphodiesterase. So nitric oxide tells cyclic GMP, open the gates, and then phosphodiesterase says, not so fast. And it kicks out cyclic GMP. And so what we're doing is we're stopping the guy that stops the guy that creates the nitric oxide. So double negative, we're basically allowing we're stopping phosphodiesterase, which then allows cyclic GMP to do its thing. Now, we have 3 major phosphodiesterase inhibitors that everyone's aware of. Viagra, which is the original one, Levitra, and Tadalafil, right? So their generic names I have written down there. So Tadalafil is Cialis, sildenafil is Viagra, and vardenafil is Levitra. Now, you technically could use a sildenafil or a vardenafil for the pump. The issue is they have shorter half-lives and they're often more potent. and more likely to give side effects. Not always. There are some people who have more side effects on tadalafil versus sildenafil, but more often than not, a sildenafil, aka Viagra, is going to cause more side effects than a tadalafil. So if you're going to the gym and you're just looking to open up your blood vessels, you can also use a much lower dose than using it for sexual dysfunction. So tadalafil is usually the medication of choice that guys are using if they're going to the gym. They're stepping on stage. They're trying to increase their vascularity. Tadalafil is usually the way we go. Now, again, people are like, well, this is a sexual dysfunction drug. Why are we using it? I explained how it blocks phosphodiesterase. And another thing to think about is that these drugs Viagra was being developed for cardiovascular disease and to help with keeping your blood vessels clean and living a long, healthy, hard life. So it makes sense then if you are using these to help your heart muscle out, it's going to help all the muscles in your body and even particularly the brain. There's more evidence coming out that tadalafil probably is going to be beneficial for Alzheimer's and dementia. And it would make sense it's going to be good for a lot of things then, probably even neuropathy or anything like most things in your body are going to require blood flow. So the issue is too much blood flow definitely can lead to inflammation. So you got to definitely find the balance. And so that's why tadalafil is used for most often is going to probably be the medication used for helping with the pump. Now, you could consider a couple other medications. Nobivol is actually a beta blocker. So, anyone who's had a heart attack or anyone who's very sympathetic dominant, like a high heart rate or high blood pressure, you give them a beta blocker. And what beta blockers do, you have alpha and beta receptors. Beta 1 is usually more particular for the heart. Beta 2 is more particular for your lungs. So people are familiar with like clenbuterol or ephedra, and these are beta 2 agonists. So they actually activate the beta 1 and more particular beta 2. So it helps you breathe better, but it also increases your sympathetic output. So it's like energy, go, 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 go. So you take like an ephedra, you have a ton of energy because it's acting these beta receptors. Now, what Nobivol actually does is it blocks beta 1. So it actually slows your heart rate down. Now, the other beta blockers are not as specific. If you don't have to block beta 2, especially if you're trying to exercise and you can stay to beta 1, that's why Nobivol is the preferred out of the beta blockers. And it actually has some evidence that actually does stimulate nitric oxide release. I've taken one before and it really suppresses me. It actually makes me slightly depressed because it's blocking your beta receptor. So it kind of allows you to not get wound up. So like if I take a beta blocker, it's hard for my heart rate to get over like 120 whenever I'm exercising. And the other thing that ends up happening is some guys get sexual dysfunction and just overall depressed. Now with Nobivol, that doesn't seem to happen as often. And then also because you're suppressing the sympathetic nervous system, people have a tendency not only to be lazy, but just lower your basic metabolic rate. So because of that, then you can gain weight. Like you're going to lean towards metabolic syndrome. Now, a lot of the people who need these are already metabolically unhealthy. So that's one of the more tough things to parse out as far as like anecdotal evidence versus double-blind placebo-controlled trials. Like, well, you already have people who are metabolically unhealthy, but other rabbit hole. So with that being said, I wouldn't use this unless you needed it. But that's good to know if you end up having a high heart rate or if your blood pressure is high and you need to decide to go on a beta blocker, like this is the one that I particularly would use, not medical advice for you, talk to a doctor. Telmisartan is another one. This is an angiotensin 2 receptor blocker. This again is also used for blood pressure. It can reduce vasoconstriction, which vasoconstriction, opposite of dilation, right? Constrict means to make smaller. And also this has PPAR activity. This is kind of like it mimics exercise. And honestly, at the doses that you would use for telmisartan, I don't buy into the PPAR activity as much. There's some evidence to it. It seems like it needs to be in higher doses. So again, I wouldn't go for this one. It also does seem to improve insulin sensitivity. But if you need to be on a blood pressure med, these are kind of some of your options. Minoxidil, many people know this. This is a potassium channel opener. So this causes smooth muscle relaxation, again, vasodilation. A lot of people use this for hair loss. So again, another tool in the tool chest. Personally, I wouldn't go for it unless you were having blood pressure issues. And then you should be chatting with the doctor about these things. With the phosphodiesterase inhibitors, it is also important that phosphodiesterase inhibitors like tadalafil will slightly lower your blood pressure. So if you're going to use them for your pump, most of the guys that are using this in this circumstance, I assume their blood pressure is probably teetering on the high end anyways. But isn't important to know if you have low blood pressure, like if you're mixing a lot of these things, you can drop your blood pressure low enough that, I mean, I guess you could go unconscious slightly, but as a doctor, I have to say that. So be cautious if you're mixing a lot of these antihypertensives, aka blood pressure meds. The other thing with tadalafil, some guys get sinus pressure, acid reflux, dizziness, vision changes. You probably heard the commercial. Be careful, ask your doctor if you're on nitrates for chest pain. So always a good idea to talk to a medical practitioner if you're going to be playing with these things. Supplement wise, I think most people on my channel are going to be very familiar with these. These are mostly going to be in your pre-workout supplements: arginine, citrulline, orthanine. I didn't put orthanine on here. Those all help with the urea cycle, which is how we create nitric oxide. Beetroot, agmatine also help with that. At this point, when I first got into working out, it was all arginine. But it's funny. I feel better pumps from arginine personally. I think there's probably something going on there with where you're at in the urea cycle and how much arginine and citrulline you have, because arginine is what is a closer signal to creating nitric oxide, but citrulline kind of plugs the pathway and forces it down into nitric oxide. And most of the research has shown that citrulline is better. And then when you're using, I put specifically citrulline malate there because it's not just citrulline. So I think it's 50% off the top of my head. So if you have 6 grams of citrulline malate, like 3 of it's going to be citrulline. Otherwise, it's going to be malate. Malate's still good for your mitochondria. It's used in the citric acid cycle. So that's usually why people use the citrulline malate form. Same thing with arginine. There's different ways, arginine nitrate, and there's a couple other different forms of arginine, AKG, alpha ketoglutarate. That's also in the citric acid cycle. So that will also help with your mitochondria. I'm not a big fan of beetroot. I think beetroot's one of those vegan, people who are being supernatural about oh, I'll just take some beetroot. I've never really noticed much from beetroot, to be honest, but research is there for that. Glycerol too. This was somewhere in between. Glycerol might be more of one of the osmotic cellular hydration. It kind of more so pulls in water, which does lead us into the osmotic and cellular hydration. I put osmosis there, right? Water moves towards the area of higher concentration. So you're trying to get all of these molecules in your cell, right? Creatine, taurine. We'll talk about electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium in your cell. So water follows that, right? For every 1 gram of glycogen, you hold about 3 grams of water. So, and then this is the thing with creatine. People are like, oh, I added water weight. But if it's in your cell, this is what doesn't really make a lot of sense when people are like, is it sitting in your fat cells, or where do you think that it's going? It's going to follow salt and it's going to have a gradient. So really, if you're having creatine, it should increase intracellular. So it should make your muscles look bigger. It's not like it goes into your fat cells and makes you hold water around your fat. So I'm a big fan of creatine. It's really became more kind of ebbs and flows, but recently it's been even more popular. I put 3 to 5 grams. That's a safe dose. You can go up 5, 10. You probably heard a lot of the more recent research showing that creatine, 10, 15 grams, especially if you're sleep deprived, helps out your mitochondria. We got taurine there. I'm a big fan of carnitine. Carnitine, it's how your mitochondria move fatty acids into the cell to be burned. So you need extra carnitine, increases androgen receptor, depending on how you want to word, density or sensitivity. So basically it makes your testosterone more potent. And then biotin also helps with nitric oxide. And biotin actually helps with creating choline, which is our next one, is going to be our neurotransmitter support, because you need acetylcholine for your cells to talk to each other. So if you want to squeeze your muscle cell, which is what you have to do, right? You have to make contractions to get the pump. So if you don't have choline and you're not moving the muscle, right? And then a lot of people who have taken, alpha GPC, it has some glycerol in it. And then it also helps increase choline. Huperzine is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, so that increases your choline levels. And choline helps create acetylcholine, which is the neurotransmitter, which not only increases nitric oxide, but is what we use for our muscle cells to talk to each other. So get that better squeeze. You also get better focus, you can't get a pump if you can't stay focused and stay in the gym. Foundations, most people are magnesium deficient. So most people, I think, again, if you're on my channel, I've talked about magnesium quite a bit. I'd say you want to do a couple 100 milligrams a day, doing a pre-workout. Magnesium also helps with smooth muscle dilation, opening your blood vessels. Vitamin C2 actually helps with blood vessel health as well. I put CoQ there. CoQ is an antioxidant, which will help with kind of free radical damage. You can go down the list of whatever your favorite antioxidant is. A lot of these will actually work as vitamin C works as an antioxidant. NAC, N-acetylcysteine, just CoQ10, heart. That's why I put that one there. And yeah, cramping. So I threw some potassium on there, a couple hundred milligrams before and after. Now, in order to get that good pump, though, you need to be sleeping because sleeping is important for your circadian rhythm. So that's going to help you with dopamine serotonin release, not having too much cortisol release. Definitely want to be hydrated. You need water to move this stuff. Now, the other thing is you don't want to be drinking like 4 liters of distilled water, right? Like this is why I put these electrolytes on here. Most people are going to be pretty sufficient if you're eating a balanced diet, but there's lots of electrolyte supplements out there now that you could try out, use. And so I just threw some numbers out there: sodium, potassium, magnesium, chatted about most of these. Get a gram of salt in before you go to the gym. And then also carbs, carbs, insulin, super anabolic, and getting them in pre-workout. You have carbs. Carbs are what's going to fuel and give you energy. You will deplete your glycogen storages depending on how hard you work. And activating the carbs and releasing insulin helps shuttle a lot of these nutrients into your muscle cells. So on the other end, what's going to ruin your pump? Being dehydrated, having poor sleep, low carbohydrate intake, overtraining, because those kind of all run together. Like overtraining, you're going to have higher cortisol, and you're probably going to be carb depleted unless you are, getting sufficient amount. And with the carnivore keto craze, you can do it. I can't, and again, prove me wrong. Tell me if, let me know if you're on keto or you're on carnivore. Leave a comment below and be like, yeah, I get great, crazy pumps all the time. That's one of the main things I hear when people go keto, they go carnivore. It's like hard to get that pump. I've done it. I've done keto carnivore. I do not get the same kind of pumps that I get. Honestly, the best pumps are when you're dieting, and then you go and have a cheat meal and then you just like swell up. It's because all that osmotic, all the salt, sodium, potassium, carbohydrates, all that's just coming back in. So be careful overtraining. I'm a carb guy personally. I think you do it within reason. Alcohol, man, it's funny. I can remember when I was an undergrad and, I did the whole Thursday, Friday, Saturday, probably throw a 30 pack down. And one of the first shows I was competing for, back then it takes you a couple days, if you're drinking Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you're feeling okay. Maybe on Monday, maybe two. And by Wednesday is when I was getting good pumps. And then I remember like I didn't do alcohol for a couple weeks and the pumps were insane. So if there's anything to convince you about alcohol, it's for the pumps, man. Do it for the pumps. Smoking vasoconstricts. So most people know that. You go and you puff a cigarette, it's like your fingers feel cold almost instantly. A lot of people, even with their noses and their ears, and they'll get lightheaded. That's because you're actually cutting off circulation. And the same then goes for oversympathetic activation. So caffeine is really there's a sweet spot, couple hundred milligrams. I think once you get above 300, 400, you're probably getting more into that vasoconstriction territory. Same thing if you're doing other stimulants or Adderall, or it really depends. I don't want to throw some certain stimulants under the bus. Like caffeine turns into paraxanthine. Paraxanthine would probably be better than caffeine. Yohimbe works on the shooting from the hip here. I think it's alpha 2 blocker, which increases sympathetic because the alpha 2 is actually different. Like alpha 1, beta 1, and beta 2, if you agonize them, you increase your sympathetic nervous system. Where with alpha 2, when you were to activate it, you're actually blocking. Is that right? Yeah. Someone double check me. But Yohimbe, right? I think it's alpha 2 blocker. Anyways, Yohimbe's a crazy one. Really want to get that right. Correct me below. So what would be like a complete workout stack? And again, people ask me all the time, Tadalafil, whatever the smallest amount you need. Don't do more than what you need. So I'd say like 1-2 milligrams a couple times a week. It has a long half-life. You can go as high as 2.5, 5. But again, work with the doctor. Nitric oxide, you can do kind of this mix of do like some citrulline malate, some agmatine, do some beetroot, osmotic, 30, 40 grams of carbs, 500 milligrams to a gram of salt, a couple hundred milligrams of potassium, maybe some glycerol. Neuro support, personally, I really notice huperzine and alpha GPC. So alpha GPC, 600 milligrams, huperzine. You can start lower, 50 to 100 micrograms of huperzine. Throw some vitamin C in there too. I would do these all pre-workout. Personally, I would then also throw in a couple hundred milligrams of caffeine. I feel pretty good on caffeine. And then daily, you should be on the creatine, carotene, biotin. You could do that pre-workout if you want. Creatine in particular is not as sensitive. I do carnitine in the morning. Would be beneficial to do that pre-workout, biotin as well. But if you're doing these other, with biotin, if you're running these other choline, up to you. Won't hurt anything. Biotin HCl also helps with, if you have HCl, it's hydrochloric acid, helps with stomach acid. So you could stack that before a meal. Be careful taking too much HCl on your stomach, especially if you have an ulcer, though. So wrapping it all up, I hope this was helpful. Tons of information here about how to get those perfect pumps. We basically broke it down into 3 different areas of, vascularity, osmotic, neuro. So it's not one or the other. I think a lot of people really kind of boil it down to just nitric oxide. But, if you don't have the salt, if you can't contract the muscle, it's not going to work out. So be careful when you're messing with these things. Do remember that they can give serious side effects. So if you're mixing a lot of these at once, it can drop your blood pressure, headaches, vision changes, all that stuff. So a good idea to run your protocol by a medical professional. Now, anything I forgot, I'd love to hear how you guys increase your nitric oxide, some dosing, comments below, and if I miss anything. And if you found this topic interesting, I think you'd like this other video that I did. Thanks for stopping by. Until next time, stay vigilant, my friends, and God bless.